Welcome, everybody. I am back now with a hoodie on. So, different Robert than Writing Sprint Robert. How are we doing today? Welcome, NJ, Christian Brooks, Medfit Culture. Welcome, Kilby. All right. So today is story support, specifically about motivation and momentum. So if you're having a struggle with your motivation or momentum, then bring that up in the chat. We would love to have a conversation, be supportive together, answer any questions that you're having. So, is anyone feeling particularly stuck in their story yet? Welcome, B. Welcome, Paula. Welcome, Ginger. Okay, Erica is feeling stuck. So, what? Let me see what I can do here. My motivation or my characters? Oh, I get it. Are we talking about my motivation or your character's motivation? It could be both. Specifically about your motivation. If you are feeling like things are starting to slow down with your writing pace, then this chat is to help you diagnose what might be happening there, and maybe give you some tools and things to try and work through that. So it might be that you're struggling with character motivation too, but it's primarily that situation. So Amy says, I'm writing fantasy for the first time ever trying. No idea what my magical system will be. That is a tricky one. Amy, I'll ask you a question. How deep have you gone into magic systems specifically? Have you looked them up? Have you read a lot of fantasy and this is just your first fantasy novel that you're writing? Because let me find a few tools that might be helpful to you. But we have something kind of designed specifically for you. Okay, so this is your first novel. Good to know. And you've read about the Sanderson rules. Sounds good. Yeah, those have kind of permeated the fantasy world. But let me go through here. So let's delete this and then okay, and I'll duplicate that. Okay. First and foremost, I just want to point you in the direction of a really good resource. So let me find the link here, because I don't know if you've tuned into our previous ones, but Doug actually hosted a magic system workshop here. But we have so many live streams that it's tricky to find the link. If anyone finds it before me and wants to share it in the chat, then that'd be great. Let me see here. Yeah, I know it's in here somewhere, but we just have so many videos. We need to organize our YouTube channel. Okay. I will hunt down that link in a little bit, but I want to get into this topic a little bit. on the magic system. So if you've read through kind of here we go. If you've read about Sanderson's rules, that's great. But there are kind of two. He talks about this a little bit in some of his lecture things, but if you're leaning towards a softer magic system, thinking like Lord of the Rings, where Gandalf and some of the other like magical beings can kind of just do what needs to be done in the moment. And I know like in the books themselves, this is like a debated topic. I know in the books themselves that there is some deep lore to how the magic works. And I'm not trying to rob Tolkien of that. But just in terms of what does your magic system look like, it could be a hard magic system or a soft magic system. A hard magic system is more Sanderson-esque, where there's specific rules, and it makes it more satisfying for the reader when you solve problems with magic. And so that's kind of the interesting thing that we see with Lord of the Rings, is it's not that Gandalf doesn't solve problems with magic, because he does, but the big problems that need to be sorted out have to be sorted out by a hobbit or a person who is not a magical being. And so because it's a hobbit who has to take the ring to Mordor, it's more satisfying that we understand. I'm a little out of focus here. Sometimes my camera's autofocus doesn't work. I'll just scoot a little closer maybe. But how about now? There we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, so there's some things to play around with there. If somebody can find the link for Doug's Magic System Workshop, then that would be great. But yeah, I think Mizell has a really good suggestion here. I'd look at your world and see what magic seems to fit. So is it more academic or more natural? There's lots of really good examples of cool magic systems that you can play with. But yeah, in this case, NJ West, I think, is making a good point here, where magic comes with a price, and that price either is paid by your characters or paid by your readers. And what do I mean by that? I mean that that the magic itself, if your characters, like, you know, if they have some resource, let's say they have to, you know, I don't know, they have to burn wood in order to use their magic, then the moment that your readers understand that, then you can put your characters in peril by making them run out of wood. If they don't have wood to burn, then they cannot use their magic. And that leads to some really interesting cases in which they have to solve that problem, right? The cost that the reader has to pay sometimes is, if you, let's say that you have a magical character who is tied up, but previously they've had spells that they can just conjure from their mind that, you know, lights things on fire or changes one material into another. You can't really tie up that character anymore, because if they can just change the rope into ice or something like that, and that's something that we know they can do, then you would have to make sure that the problems you're throwing at the character make sense in that context. So it is kind of a question of whatever rules they understand, and you don't have to have hard and fast rules on everything, but whatever rules the reader understands leads to you having a better ability to lock in what are the problems that your character has to solve, and what are the problems that other, like, enemies can throw at them. So I hope that's helpful. We have this amazing workshop, I promise, that is eluding me in our massive library of YouTube videos. But I will find that and we'll get that sent over to you. But I hope that's helpful. And I think you say here that you're pantsing it for now, and I think that's fine. If the magic isn't the central focus of your story and it's more of a character focused narrative and it's just a cool magical world, then you don't necessarily have to have a fully fleshed out magic system in your first draft. But if you are feeling like it's getting you stuck, then it may be worth taking some time to workshop it and really think about, okay, what are the things that you're missing there? Because are you feeling stuck because you don't know what their magical abilities are, or are you feeling stuck because you don't know how to throw problems at them that would actually be challenging given what their magical abilities are, if that's making sense? So, okay. B, my motivation challenge most days is just to get up and write because I only want to sleep. That is a very good point, and something that we talk about a lot here at Dabble is, for most of us, we are not yet fortunate enough to write full-time as authors. And so that means that beyond just the normal life stuff, like we have a job on top of that. And so we actually have this article here, and it's literally called How to Write with a Full-Time Job and Also Sleep Sometimes. And so hopefully this article that I'm putting in the chat will be helpful for those who are just trying to carve out time, especially when we get to the end of NaNoWriMo. We've got a really good, awesome group here in this chat and in our writing sprints that I feel like we're all helping each other, helping keep each other motivated. But, you know, for the other 11 months of the year, how do you keep up that habit? Hopefully that article will be helpful in that case. Brittany, I am at the climax of my story, and the original climax I'd outlined no longer fits the story. Oh no! This is actually fairly common in my experience with other writers. It seems like, especially when you've outlined something, that by the time you reach the later stages of the story, there's just more room for your story to change. So if it changes over time, as all things do, then you're going to end up with some things maybe in different locations or with different motivations. And so there's a couple different things that you can do to work through this. The first thing you can do is you could just write the ending that you have outlined and see how that is going. And this is more of an exercise. It's not an actual like write this and make it fit into your story, but more of like a if write it, and then if that was how your story ended, it might give you a more concrete understanding of what might be going wrong there, where things aren't fitting, and it might help you find how to fit those things in place. But the other thing is, and it doesn't have to be a perfect draft. Like I'm saying, you can write it out with really messy prose or just skipping over, instead of writing out the whole dialogue, you can just say, and then these two banter about this kind of thing. So you can kind of do a really, really quick and dirty draft. But that's something that you can also do with multiple endings. So as you're kind of exploring this ending for you, it sounds like you're maybe a bit more of an outliner, but maybe you can try outlining it again given the current circumstances, or you can take a page from a pantser's book and you can just write a couple of different quick and dirty endings and then see which ones you like and see which ones like feel like they'd be fun and actually fit your narrative. So That can be a good exercise that I've seen, and it also kind of takes the pressure off because especially when you get to the climax of a story, it's really easy to convince yourself like I really have to stick this landing, and you do, but you don't in the first draft. You don't need to have it be this perfect climax to the whole tale in this first draft. And so if you tell yourself, I'm writing a couple different endings to see what I like and what I don't like, and maybe these two characters fall in love in this one and they don't in this one, or I leave that for a sequel, and like as you kind of play around with those elements, I think that you might find that the freedom of that might help you make more progress, and it also just feels good to get words down on the page. So sometimes kind of doing those quick and dirty drafts of ideas can help you take that pressure off. So you're not like, I need this to be a certain way or I need this to be perfect. So, any other tips for these? Sorry, I need to scroll down on the chat, trying to keep up with all these questions. Let's see here. Okay. Yeah, let's move on to another question then. NJ West, I have a whole world planned out but no plot to use. Trying to come up with things, but it's been a struggle. Yeah, I know what you mean. This is the exact same problem that I faced at the beginning of NaNoWriMo, is I have this cool world built out, and I do want to spend time there. I want to write a story there, but it just wasn't working for the fast drafting process of NaNoWriMo. Now, that doesn't mean, for me, I switched stories, and I think I sent you an email today about that, NJ. But in this case, I might recommend a similar thing where sometimes finding finding some characters and finding some points of conflict can be the most interesting thing. And so rather than trying to write a big story in this world, maybe try writing some shorter stories. And again, they don't have to be publishable or amazing or anything, and you can speed up that process however you need to. But writing shorter stories in that setting might get you some ideas as to what kind of stories are fun to tell in this world, and what kind of problems can show up in this world that are unique, or what real world problems can I throw into this story that would be interesting. Like if it's a world with dragons and you're a traveling merchant, what do you do to make sure your goods don't get stolen from dragons? And you can just write a short story about a merchant who has to like protect himself from a dragon trying to steal his stuff or something like that. And that can be just a short little tale, but that can give you some more world building details and kind of help you just get comfortable writing in that world. So again, I know it kind of stinks, especially during NaNoWriMo, where you really want to feel like you're making progress on a novel. So that might not be the best exercise for right now, but that is something that I would recommend. So, okay, we've got Valentine. I'm having issues. Valentine, I hope your son's okay. I'm having issues knowing how many chapters I need by the end. I wouldn't worry about it. I know that that's like such an annoying answer. But as far as like how many chapters should my story be, all of that can be fixed in post. So if you're currently in the editing process, then a kind of rule of thumb is like your chapter should be uh it depends on the genre, right? So if you're writing a thriller story, your chapters are going to be really short and really fast paced and always end on a cliffhanger. And that is to like make your readers feel like they're just flying through your book if you're writing a thriller story. If you're writing an epic fantasy or a sci-fi, then they typically have a bit of a longer chapter. And then romance and mystery, they're kind of in the middle, depends on the story you're telling. But yeah, I would focus more on just telling the story, and then you will find typically the best way to figure out what to cut, what should be here, how long should all this be, is through getting feedback, whether that be from an editor or from beta readers or from a writing group. That feedback, and the best thing you can do, this is something that I've always done in my writing groups, is when you ask for feedback, don't ask for prescriptive feedback, meaning you don't want to have them tell you how they would write your story. That's not helpful feedback unless that's exactly what you're looking for, in which case you should probably hire a developmental editor to help you with that process. But when it comes to beta readers or editors and that kind of thing, the best kind of feedback you can ask for, um, when you're trying to develop the length of your story and is this working, is just asking for what is their emotional reaction to this scene. That emotional reaction to the scene is what you're trying to evoke, right? So if it's a romance scene, and you say, how does this chapter make you feel? And they're like, man, I just really like, I really want these two characters to fall in love. That's great. Then, mission accomplished, if that's what you're trying to accomplish with the chapter. So like writing and reading is an emotional exercise. And what we're trying to do with each chapter is make sure that each chapter is evoking a certain emotion, whether that's building the tension for the reader, or helping them grow closer to the characters because the characters are growing closer. Like, get emotional feedback. And if at any point they are saying, yeah, this chapter is kind of long and I feel like they talked too much about this, be careful if you only have one person giving you feedback, because one person might read a long chapter who's used to reading thrillers, and they might say, man, your chapters are super long. But then if you're writing an epic fantasy and then you hand it to an epic fantasy reader, they'll be like, oh yeah, this is perfect. It's going along right at the pace that it should. But as you get that feedback, that will be your best measuring stick for how do you solve these problems, and how do you figure out how many chapters it's supposed to be. That all of that can be figured out later. Right now I have 7 chapters in my project, but each of them has multiple scenes in them, and that's one of the perks of Dabble, is my scenes are all split up. So later on, when I'm cleaning this up, I can drag and drop, I can create new chapters and drag and drop my scenes into those chapters depending on where things fit. So yeah, I think I have like 20 scenes or something, but 7 chapters. And my drafting process is a bit messier than most others. I think Doug in particular would have a cleaner process of making sure he has all the chapters figured out. But for now, I think just don't stress too much about that. Erica, I can't write lengthy scenes. I'm just ending up with a few paragraphs each, struggling to fill them out. That's interesting, Erica. Erica, if you're still here, I'd like you to answer some questions. So with your scenes, you say you write a few paragraphs. Are those paragraphs mostly dialogue or mostly like describing what's happening and what's going on? Or are they describing the setting of the story and then just a few events happening? If you can give me an idea of maybe what might be going on there with what you're writing. So yeah, Erica, I'll hold off on finishing this. If you just want to respond and kind of let me know, do you have an idea? Is it dialogue paragraphs? Is it event paragraphs? Or is it setting paragraphs? Because whatever your answer, okay, Erica says, a lot of them are dialogue with a little bit of what's going on in general. Okay, sounds good. I had somebody in my writing group who was in a similar boat. And she just loved writing dialogue, and she was really good at it. Her dialogue was really tight, really interesting. But and this might not be the case for you, but she had trouble like setting the scene and actually describing what's going on around the characters versus what they're saying. Um, and so we gave her that feedback in the writing group, and then her scenes grew longer, and her writing got a lot better. And so I would, in this case, I think that there are three different things that kind of get balanced in a scene, and that is describing the setting, describing the events, and the dialogue. And if you try and build out those three, um, if you try and build out those three instead of just the dialogue, I think you'll find that you'll get more length in your stories. But that doesn't mean that you have to do it right away. Like if you're just killing it in the dialogue space and that's really working for you and that's helping you get your story down on the page, then focus on that and have that be what you're doing. And then when you get to an editing phase or when you come back to that chapter, then ask yourself, okay, especially if your characters are saying things like like that makes me angry or things like that. Rather than telling them, hey, that makes me angry, describe that their fists clench or their jaw is clenched, or have them take, you know, an angry breath or different things like that, where you can extract some of those other details out of the dialogue, and that also will often sharpen up the prose and often lengthen it out. The other big thing is show don't tell. Show don't tell is great advice, except sometimes you do just have to tell the reader what's going on. But showing them what's going on rather than telling them what's going on is always going to take more words. And so if you feel like you're just telling them, if you're telling your readers, telling the audience, this is how this person is reacting to this situation, try and find a way to convert that to showing them. Again, like it's a simple example with the clenched jaw and that kind of thing. But that, as you try and draw those details into more of a show rather than a tell, then you're going to add length to your scenes as well. So hopefully that is helpful. But again, like you'll figure out your process, especially if you're a newer writer. You'll figure out your process on these scenes, and I don't think you have to worry too much about writing too little as long as you're getting your story down. And so don't let it kill your momentum, especially during NaNoWriMo. So, okay, let me see. Let's see here. Okay, NJ West. I have the problem where 10 different stories get unblocked in my head. So they all start writing themselves, but none of them are the one I'm trying to focus on. Yeah. I think the Writing Excuses podcast referred to this as the shiny object syndrome. And I think it happens to everyone, where, especially once you get into the middle of your story, it's very tempting to jump to another story. Because when you're writing a brand new story, and especially if you're a pantser, I feel like this is the case, but I'm sure it's also the case for outliners. I can't speak for outliners because I'm not one of them. But I have had many friends who are outliners who have shared this same thing, that the beginning of a story is just fun. Like you're basically like opening up a bunch of presents and finding out, like, even if you've outlined it, you're finding out, oh, this is how these two characters would interact. And oh, this is what their relationship looks like. And oh man, this problem that I gave them is so much more fun to write than I thought it would be. You're like opening a bunch of presents, and it's like, it's like Christmas morning. You're just like so happy. And it's kind of addicting when you're in the beginning of a story. But then you get to the middle of a story, and you have to start closing some of those boxes that you opened, or at least begin in that direction. You have to start finding ways that, okay, I've opened up all these interesting plot threads that my brain has been having fun with playing playing around in, but how am I going to tie these up? How am I going to actually find a solution to this problem, or how am I going to add or resolve tension in this character relationship? All of that gets harder once you get to the middle of a story. And so it's not just that like the muddy middle gets boring. It's literally that, it's a different process writing the middle and the climax of a story than it is writing the beginning of a story, because you're no longer just opening presents for yourself. You have to start cleaning up cleaning up your story and tying off those plot threads and making sure that they're kind of coherent. And that is really tricky. And so I would say that sometimes the best thing you can do with these 10 different stories is do them justice. Make sure that they get written down somewhere, as in like writing down the idea. Don't go off and write the whole story. But I find that if I just try and tell my brain to like be quiet and don't bother me while I'm writing this other story, that never works. What I have to do is write down a note for, hey, this is what I'm thinking for this story. And oh, this would be a really cool element of my magic system. And I'll just write it. And then after that, I'm like, okay, that's out of my brain and I can focus on my current story. So, Paula, I know where my story ends, just getting there is the adventure. Yeah, I get that. I also know where my story ends. I'm more of a pantser, and so I'm like finding my way. By the way, if you don't know, I keep using these terms. A pantser is someone who writes by the seat of their pants, someone who doesn't quite know what's going to happen in the next scene or the next chapter, don't typically have a full outline. We might have a rough outline. And a plotter or an outliner is someone who puts together their story beforehand and then writes it. So, anyways, I'm more of a pantser, and so the adventure is part of the fun for me. But I can definitely get lost in the weeds, and sometimes I do have to course correct and be like, I don't think this is heading in the direction of the end that I have in mind, and so sometimes I have to burn a couple chapters. So, okay, Kamina, my biggest problem at the moment is don't get too dramatic, don't overthink it, and try to find a good way to intertwine the personal plot with the murder mystery that doesn't feel too fast, too forced. That is a huge challenge. This sounds like a pacing problem, and we've had some pacing questions before. Like I said before, we're gonna have to do a pacing workshop. We'll get Doug on that. Doug is our resident workshop master, so we're gonna have to do a pacing workshop for sure. But I would say that in the first draft, you're not going to nail it on these things. You're not going to be able to get everything intertwined perfectly unless you really spent time in the outline phase to like really figure out this is what this needs to be, kind of thing. But even with an outline, you probably won't nail it on your pacing. You probably won't, especially with a murder mystery story. Like that is something that has lots of different threads, and you have some clues and some red herrings and more of a detective story. Those just take time to craft. And so I would say in the first draft, focus on writing the things that are fun, and not worrying too much about the pace. And then again, that is something that is much easier to sort out in the feedback stage, because like you said, don't get too dramatic and don't overthink it. That's really hard when you're critiquing your own work. Like we are our own worst critics, and we will always think that, oh man, this is the worst writing I've ever seen. And like it's easy to fall into those traps, when realistically, once you actually get feedback, it's usually people say, hey, this is pretty good, I really like this, it's just this part was a little, and then you actually have something to work on. So let me find this article. here's an article that we have on getting beta reader feedback and how to use it. So that is something that I would recommend you check out, Kamina. Ashley says, I need a pacing workshop. Yeah. We've had a lot of desire for some deeper discussion on pacing. And so, in fact, let's see here. We do have this article here, which is awesome, about how to pace a story. So I would recommend you go check that out. It's written by Abby, and Abby is amazing. So Abby really knows her stuff and puts together very, very good articles. So that is, if you're looking for a deep dive on pacing, I recommend you check out that article. But we will definitely do a pacing workshop in the future because there's clearly demand for it. Yeah. Okay, let's get back up to our questions. Gonna try and just go down the list here. Yeah, I'm trying to plan a little at this point, but figuring out where to put pivotal scenes is a bit tough. Totally understand. And sometimes you just have to make a call on where that scene should live, and then fix it later if it doesn't work. Again, and this advice would be different if we weren't in the middle of NaNoWriMo, but with a fast drafting process, like, you do sometimes just have to get out of your own head and just write those scenes and fit them in and then fix it later. So how can I get better at creating storyline transitions within the chapters of my fictionalized novel? Storyline transitions. I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to, Todd. If you're talking about like interweaving plots and subplots, so let's say that you're writing a detective story, but then there's also like a subplot romance between I don't know, the detective and her assistant or something like that. Then interweaving those things is something that's really tricky to do in the first draft usually. So that is something that I would say the way to get better at it is to finish your first draft and then edit it and make it better. Because it's really tricky to intertwine those things, especially when you're like we had who was it that said, Brittany said the climax of their story is different than the one that they had outlined. That's a pretty common case. And so if you try and interweave all your storylines and your plots and subplots, and then your ending is different than you had planned, then it doesn't work. And so the tricky part there is, if you don't know how it's all going to end, or you might have some pretty earth-shattering changes to the ending, then any hard work you do to make things interweave well isn't going to pay off in the end. And so that's why I typically recommend save all the polish that is beyond just telling a good story for the editing process, because that's where you can say, oh, I know that this character is going to, betray this character in 7 chapters, specifically with, I don't know, with a dagger. And so you can insert that dagger into some of the earlier scenes and have that be like a moment kind of thing. Whereas if you just have written in your outline, or if you're a pantser that, so-and-so betrays so-and-so, and you don't have that nitty gritty detail of how they do it or what they might be using to do that betrayal, then you can't include those key details and foreshadow and that kind of thing. So all the foreshadowing and storyline transitions where things are interwoven, all of that is way easier to do in the editing phase. How do you write from a perspective unfamiliar to you, like writing from the opposite gender or another culture's perspective? I would say that the best thing that you can do is to ask people who do live that life, who do have that perspective, if your writing fits, if they feel like this is accurate to who they are as a person, at least in most cases. Now, everyone's an individual, right? And so there are all kinds of things that will be different for every person that you ask. But the best thing you can do is just write to your best ability. Do some research, especially if you're writing from another culture that you're unfamiliar with. Do research first, because you don't want to engage in what's the word I'm looking for? You don't want to engage in stereotype where you're just writing off of what is out there in the general, general media kind of thing. So do research, make sure that you actually understand what people from those cultures think. And again, like, all generalizations are false. So it's not that everyone from a certain culture thinks a certain way, but just make sure that you've done enough research to feel like you're 90% of the way there. And then the best thing you can do is get some beta readers, even if it's just for that one scene, to give you some feedback and make sure that they feel like they're being well represented. So, okay. I have folder, each has a story file on it. I get a thought. B is saying, I go back to notes later. Yeah, so sometimes the notes process can be a little messy, but having those story notes, especially when they're bugging you, can be really helpful. So how many of those chapters need to be absolute? Here, Valentine again. And how many of those chapters need to be absolutely needed versus filler chapters? The rule of thumb, again, I took a class from Brandon Sanderson, so I apologize that I keep going back to him, but he knows his stuff in terms of writing. So he sets a goal for himself that every chapter that he writes will be somebody's favorite chapter. It doesn't have to be the consensus that it's the best chapter, but he tries to make sure that each chapter that is written is somebody's favorite chapter. And so when you're talking about filler chapters, there's a good process called scene and sequel, which is like a literary theory on how to let me grab this link here. We have an article on this as well. But we have this article, scene and sequel. Scene is where things happen. Sequel is the quiet moment afterwards where we process what happened. And oftentimes, we look at the big action piece and that's that's exciting, or there's a big fight in a romance novel, or the scenes where things are happening can be exciting and can be like really eventful, but the scenes that matter, the scenes that endear us to the characters, is when they're processing what has happened afterwards and how they react to that, and how does that draw them closer to the other characters in the story, or does it draw them further away? And those internal reactions to the external happenings can be really, really powerful, and is what can lead to those filler chapters actually being somebody's favorite. So make sure that even if it is a filler chapter, which might be between those big action moments, that we get some internal growth or some internal decline from your characters, and that will lead to people really connecting emotionally with the characters. Because otherwise you just end up with a Transformers film. No shame for anyone who enjoys Transformers films. I've also enjoyed the occasional Transformers film, but if all you have is explosions, then it feels a little shallow. And so don't discount the value of those filler chapters where something isn't necessarily happening externally. Make sure that things are happening internally for your characters, and then it'll feel much more impactful and more fun to write. So, okay, let's see here. My other story I'm writing is for my Star Wars character in our TTRPG. He can't use certain parts of the Force if his hands are tied behind him, I think. That's fun. That sounds like a great time. And sometimes just engaging in a TTRPG or anything else can keep those fun story ideas flowing. And I've had many ideas for my D&D campaigns and things like that I've just stolen whole cloth and put into my stories. So okay. NJ says, I just did an action scene. It was just a jumble of things I wanted to see at some point, and it came out more fun than the last 20,000 words to try and build my characters. Frustrating. Yeah, that can happen. But as you go through that process of just creation, then maybe you can split up that action scene over multiple scenes and kind of spread out some of those occurrences and keep it fun for yourself as you go along. So NJ West, could we do these sprints once a week after NaNoWriMo, writing Wednesdays perhaps? Yes, we already have writing sprint Wednesdays. That's what we were doing before NaNoWriMo, and so we will continue that in perpetuity into the future, except for like holidays and things. But yeah, we've been talking about that as a team, and we're thinking that writing sprints, depending on the demand and how many people are showing up regularly, we may expand that. So it kind of depends on you guys. If you guys want more, then let us know. But we will be doing a writing sprint every Wednesday, even after NaNoWriMo's gone. So don't worry, we'll still be around. Okay. Does Dabble have any historical fiction resources addressing the muddy middle? Great question. So we do have let me see here. Let me go to Dabble U really fast. Gonna grab this resource for you. So we have lots of resources on a lot of these genres. And we have 5 articles on historical fiction. And a lot of these talk about research and kind of adding details and that kind of thing. But hopefully these articles are helpful to you, be a desert bird. So I'd recommend you check those out. NJ West, anyone fall in love with a side character over your main? I'm never sure what to do with that. Should I change perspectives? In this case, I would say keep writing from your main character. It may be the fact that your side character is just objectively a more fun character, and that side character would be everyone's favorite. But what I've found is that typically with readers and writing groups, that side character might be your favorite character, but it won't be everyone's favorite character. And so that's actually a good balance to have. But it kind of depends. I tend to say, like, be careful with switching perspectives unless you really feel like it would help with your momentum moving forward. So Bella Ray says, I love both my characters, so I couldn't choose one over the other. But yeah, it's just what feels right to you. You are the author here, and so you'll know best if that is something that needs to be changed. Erica gave good advice here too. Try to find ways to make the main character more interesting so that you'll love both characters. Okay. B's given some good advice here too. Life isn't static, so your story shouldn't be either. Sometimes this person is more important in your life than that one is. 5 minutes later, maybe something else. Yeah, exactly. So you may be really enjoying this side character in your current scenes, but then in the future, as your main character gets more character growth, then they can really shine, and you'd probably want to try and ensure that they get their moment to shine as well. Bella Ray, what do I do if I'm stuck in my story and I'm unsure how to write it? Um, the the most annoying but best advice that I have gotten is just to write it anyways. If you're really, really like, if you sit down and you try and just write it anyways, and you're only getting, let's say you hop into one of our writing sprints and you're only getting 100 words every 20 minutes or something like that, and that happens over multiple days, then there's probably a bigger problem with your story that you need to work out. And that will probably reveal itself to you if you try to keep writing, where you'll realize like, I need to do more work on this character relationship, or I need a mentor to help them get through this, or even to just give them someone to talk to while they're learning this new skill, or trying to solve the murder, or whatever it might be. So in that case, I would say, I know it sounds so dumb, but just try and write it anyways, even if you're struggling, even if you're stuck. Write the next scene and see what happens. There's been lots of fun interactions that we've had in the writing sprints where people say, light something on fire in the room, or ninjas suddenly attack, or a dragon bursts in, whatever it is. And sometimes you can just write the next scene with something ridiculous like that happening. And that can actually be helpful. It can reveal some interesting insights to you about, okay, if I right now in my life, a dragon burst through this window, I would not care about maintaining this live stream. I would have to abandon you guys and face this dragon. What would be most important to me in that scenario? It would be, making sure my family's safe. But if I was home alone, then what is important to me? Do I escape? Who do I call? What do I do in those situations? Like, as you kind of work through that process of, okay, if something crazy happened right now, what does this character care about? That can help you figure out, okay, this is what they care about in this scene. There's this object that they're particularly attached to, or this person that they would want to protect. And that can help you kind of get through that. If you're really struggling to write, sometimes you just need to take the pressure off, write something crazy and silly and ridiculous, and then just keep going. So NJ West, responding to my previous suggestions, what if I did an anthology all in the same world? Would it make sense to create the story from all angles, all kingdoms and lands, and have them converge near the end? Certainly, it's whatever story you want to tell. The tricky part about that is like marketing it. So if you're planning on getting into publishing, then I know that NJ, you have a book out already. And so typically with like shorter stories or an anthology of short stories, that doesn't sell as well as a full novel, but it can be really good in supporting, like, let's say you write all these short stories. Now we're getting into like book marketing stuff, but if you write all these short stories in this world, and then you discover a story that you want to tell, a really fun novel that you want to write in that world, then it can be a really good way to market that world and that story to people, where, if you get your readers who are interested and finish that novel, and then they're like waiting for book 2 or whatever it is, you can say, hey, if you want more stories in this world, go to my website and read all these short stories, kind of thing. And it can be a really good way to like keep up interest in that world and show that you've thought through the world building and stuff. But we have a lot of this chat isn't specifically about book marketing, but we have a lot of resources on that, so I'll also put a link to that if you're interested in the businessy side of writing. Okay, let's see here. Ashley says, I struggle with dialogue. I'm much better at description. Yeah, and those things, they are kind of like This is going back to Bella Ray's question, I think, or Erica's question. Yeah, Erica's question. But when you get into description, dialogue, and setting, those things, some just naturally writers will be better at one of those rather than the other. And so those are kind of like muscles that you'll get better at it over time. And the best way to get better at it is to get feedback on your writing and ask people, hey, is this dialogue working? And hopefully they'll tell you. And feedback is, if you want to get your story better, make it better, then feedback is key. That's all I'll say there. Feedback is amazing in terms of actually knowing what to change and what to fix, because your own brain came up with it, so your own brain can't see the flaws. And so really, it does come down to sometimes you have to swallow your pride and accept, okay, I thought this was a really good scene, but it's not working the way that I wanted to, so I'm going to rewrite it. Or sometimes if you get feedback and they're like, I don't really like this, sometimes you're like, well, I'm the author here and I'm going to stick with it. And I think that I can improve this in my own way there. So, okay. Ashley says, I think I'm too focused on making every conversation and scene plot focused. I need to add more character focused material. Yeah, totally. That's another thing that can be solved in the editing process. But I would highly recommend that you can just practice those things, like you can go back and do it later. If it's very plot focused, then go back to that chapter and kind of explore, okay, but what is my character feeling right now? And what are they worried about in this situation? And how are they reacting emotionally to this? And then look for character conflict in those moments where they're going through the plot, right? But where might two characters differ on how they think this problem should be solved? And add some conflict there, and that adds interest, certainly. So, okay. Let's see here. We're getting to the end of the hour. And so I have just like very few slides here. So I will share that here, and then we will wrap this up. Okay, Todd, you were referring to subplots. So I hope that was helpful for you. Yeah, for subplots, we also had the subplots. We had a subplots chat in our 60 days challenge thing. So let me find that for you. Yeah, here we go. I'll share this link for you. Hank and Doug chatted about subplots and just how to tie them in. So they did a really good job if you want to dig deeper into that. I shared some links there. Okay. Ginger, for the links for the Wednesday writing sprints, the ones after Nano, we haven't created the live streams yet, but we will have those up before the end of the month. So you can keep an eye on our YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. That is where you'll be able to keep up with us. And we have lots of other live events like craft chats and author interviews and things. So we keep this going throughout the whole year. We're just doing extra this month. So NJ West, what is a TTRPG? Right. Speaking in acronyms here. Sorry about that. TTRPG is a tabletop role-playing game. Okay. So let's wrap up here. Thanks everyone for joining us. let me share this really fast. And this is just something to keep in mind, because as we've been doing the writing sprints and as we have been working together to write our stories, there is something that is encouraging to me. And let me present this screen here. And one of the most encouraging things is math. So every time in the writing sprints, I ask people, how have you done? How much did you write? And the range there seems to be that people are writing somewhere between 500 and 2,000 words each day that there's a writing sprint. Seems to be that's about the range. And no matter where you are on that spectrum, just keep in mind the power of math. So even if you are only writing 500 words a day, if you can keep up that pace, which we've been doing every day together, if you can keep up that pace for 100 days, then you will have your 50,000 words done. If you feel like you're behind, you're not going to hit the 50,000 words for NaNoWriMo, that's okay. You don't have to. What you have to do is tell your story. And just keep that in mind as we go forward. Whatever your daily word count is, multiply that by 100, and it will be a much bigger number. And realistically, we've been doing this for 13 days now. And I know that in our writing sprints, we've had quite a few of you who have written 10,000 words, 20,000 words. Some of you are even past the 50,000 at this point. And that is how much progress you've already made just in these last 2 weeks. And so if that is where you're at in these last 2 weeks, just think about how much effort you put in the last 2 weeks. Do you think you could keep that up for another 2 weeks, and then another 2 weeks after that, and then maybe another 2 weeks after that? And if you can keep that up, if you can keep up what we're doing here, even if you're not that fast, even if you're not the fastest writer showing up to the writing sprints, you will reach the end. Like, you'll be able to get that story out. And so that is my final thing, is just keep in mind, like, you guys have done amazing work thus far, and you've written a ton at this point. And so remember that even if you're not on track to reach the 50,000 words, you are way farther than you were when you started. You are way ahead of where you were at the beginning of November. And so you can take that one and run with it and keep up the habits and keep it going. And yeah, if you have other questions, we will have more story Q&A sessions. In fact, I think we have one this Friday, if I'm not mistaken. So, and that one will be with Hank and Doug. And so they'll have their own perspectives and good things to share there. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, everybody. I hope that you had got some motivation from this session. And yeah, it's like Yolanda's saying here, every word you wrote this month is one more word than you had in October. Exactly. And if you can keep that mentality and keep moving forward, then your story is going to be written. You're going to reach the end, and then you'll have a book. And how awesome will that be? So, so keep moving forward. You got this. We all got this. We're doing this together, and it's going to be awesome all the way to the end. And thanks, everyone, for tuning in. And we will catch you tomorrow for more writing sprints and more fun events. So awesome. Thanks, everybody.